For more now, we are joined from Nairobi by James Shikwati. He is a Kenyan economist and he is the founder and CEO of a business magazine called African Executive. Joining us from Beijing is He Wenpeng. She is a professor and director of African Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. With us here in Washington is Robin Sanders. She is a former U.S. ambassador to Nigeria and the Republic of Congo. And from Detroit, we are joined by Rita Kiki Edozie. She is professor of African Affairs at Michigan State University. She is also the author of the African Union's Africa. Welcome to all of you to the show. James, let me start with you in Nairobi. What do you expect will come out of this African Union summit in Johannesburg?
Well, I was expecting that there's going to be focus on the concerns of migrating Africans to Europe, and also the concern of youth challenges that we've seen rise, issues of xenophobia in South Africa. But unfortunately, I see it's been overshadowed by the cases of ICC.
Ambassador, when we look at these meetings of the African Union, that organizes twice a year, do they still serve a useful purpose? Is this the best forum for Africa to chart its future?
I think the African Union has come a long way from where it started as the OAU. It doesn't mean that it still doesn't have a long way to go. When you have big organizations like that, it does take a long time for them to find their footing. And I do agree with the previous speaker that, there needs to be more concrete things coming out of these summits. They tend to be focused on a lot of rhetoric to some extent, but no then translation of that rhetoric into action on the ground. I agree that I thought the migrant issue, certainly Burundi, which is exploding right before our eyes, the youth crisis, of course, in terms of employment and development. So I think that they need to find a way to turn some of their rhetoric into actual action on the ground that people can feel. They then feel that the African Union has a voice. And the other aspect, they do a peer review there, of course. But I've always wondered whether or not they're serious about their peer review, and we see that being played out now with the ICC and the fact that President Bashir has been able to leave South Africa.
Wenpeng, a big theme of this conference is development. China, of course, has been playing a major role in Africa as far as development is concerned. So what kind of cooperation can we expect in the future, both from China and from Africa, as they look ahead?
Well, I think there are lots of cooperation area has been mapped out already. When the Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Africa in the year 2013, and also followed with Premier Li Keqiang's visit to Africa in the 2014. So a lot of strategies and maps has been already mapped out. For example, like this 3 networks building plan, China is going to help Africa countries to build those aviation network, railway network, and also the roadway network. And also like industrialization, China also is willing to, export China's overcapacity of industrialization with Africa's industrialization. So I think infrastructure and also communication and also manufacture and agriculture, plus those health system building after this Ebola crisis broke out. And all of those areas are going to be very potential.
Kiki, what are your thoughts on the summit in Johannesburg and what's coming out of it? Ambassador Sanders just mentioned a moment ago that we need to see more meaningful, concrete outcomes. Do you see any evidence of that at this summit?
Summits are conferences, gatherings, spaces where there is a lot of talk and deliberation. And naturally, that needs to be happened. You've got 54 countries, member countries, and over 1 billion people represented. So there's a lot of dialogue and deliberations. And so I am very encouraged by every summit. I think that we've got to look at the African Union as a political organization, a political institution that has definitely accomplishments. It's sustained itself, over more than 50 years. And it's got challenges, and the challenges are deliberated at resolutions and dialogues and policy initiatives at the summit. So this year's summit is empowering African women. A couple of resolutions have already come out, regardless of the sidelines that make headlines, Bashir, LCC, and the ICC. That always happens, but there are some things going on the ground.
Okay, Ambassador, you want to respond
Yes,
to that?
I would like to respond because I do think, yes, it's just a summit, but I mean, as we look at other big body deliberations, actions can come out of summits too, particularly depending on how serious an issue is being considered. And sometimes what leaders say sets the tone for the deliberations and also sets the tone for the work that gets done. Yes, the work that gets done is done by commission, but it's also set by the tone the leaders set. And I do think, particularly for this particular summit, given the crisis in Burundi, given the migrant issue, so those leadership factors, even though it is a summit, comes from what is said by the leaders and how they behave and what they set the tone for. So yes, the commissions do the work, but I think the visibility of the African Union on the continent and what Africans think about the African Union is equally as important. And, you know, you can't have it both ways.
James, let me bring you into this debate, James. What is the African Union's track record? When we look back, it's had a very relatively short history, but what is its track record like?
Actually, as the ambassador pointed out, African Union is full of rhetoric and less on action. If I gave an example, when G7 leaders meet, the world looks forward to the resolutions, knowing that a lot of action will come out of those discussions. So I think what we need to look at going forward really is an African Union that reviews the purpose of why it meets. And in my opinion, we need to be looking at an African Union meeting that purposes to give African business people an opportunity to solve African challenges. But what we see a lot of the time is discussion that really develops an agenda to make Africa beg for more money from developed countries, as opposed to giving African people the opportunity to take charge of the continent's challenges and the way forward. If I recall what Professor He Winping pointed out, if there's going to be infrastructure across African countries and there are no producers within the continent, we're looking at a very dangerous situation where Africans will just, be buying products from other continents without producing their own.
Wenping, do you want to address that? The fact that China is deeply involved, of course, in the development of Africa. A lot of that development involves infrastructure, involves primary industries like mining. What about secondary industries, manufacturing industries? China, for instance, just got involved in a project in Cameroon to build a motor car assembly plant. Are we going to see more of that? Are we going to see Africa produce and export rather than just become a market for other countries?
Yes, as you rightly put forward, industrialization and the manufacturing industry are going to be another focus for China-African cooperation. Apart from those projects we can witness all around the continent, I think I will point out this trade and economic zone in a particular way. We all know the trade and economic zone, that was one of the secrets for China's economic development in the past decades. So with this development model, I think in the 2006 China-African Summit, and then one of those 8 measures has been inked in that action plan in that summit. That was to set up 3 to 5 those economic and trade zones in Africa, in different parts of Africa. But now we have seen already 7 those trade and economic zones, and more maybe will coming out because there are lots of demanding from different African countries. So with this, I think zone that we will see a cluster those development. So those Chinese enterprises, they can go into those zones to set up their factory there at the first stage. So with this first stage, industrialization has been gradually developed, and then they can spill over to other parts of that hosting country. So gradually, the technical transfer and the manufacturing, those industries' capacity in the host country, I think can be gradually developed. So that is the way exactly that China's manufacturing industry has been developed in the past decades.
Okay. Kiki, I want to get back to some of the points that you'd raised earlier on. We see some major security challenges for African countries. Islamist groups like Boko Haram still pose a major threat. There is political instability, as the ambassador mentioned, in Burundi, and that's been caused by the president there making a push for a third 5-year term. We've got the problem with Al-Shabaab in Somalia as well. How successful has the African Union been in these areas of conflict resolution, of combating the threats that face the continent?
In terms of conflict resolution, in answering to your question directly, what kinds of initiatives? Of course, the African Union is very much involved in the Burundi situation. Mm-hmm. Of course, the African Union is very much involved in the Darfur situation. The African Union has troops and missions in Somalia, Sudan, all over Africa. And the African Union has policy prescriptions to deal with these issues. It's just that it's not going to happen at one summit, is all we're saying. Okay. That these things are going to happen on the ground. I also wanted to speak to, I think, my colleague from Kenya, mm-hmm. and the question of, economic development, a strong, foremost objective for the African Union is economic integration and self-determined, sustainable development for Africans, right? Right. Not exploitative, development whereby multinational corporations, come into Africa and exploit the continent. The Union wants to convene a political collective action whereby they can engage economic development issues on their terms. Right. And so right now at the summit, they are discussing the continental free trade area whereby Africans can pull together resources to generate vibrant production and development for their own continent.
Yeah, we will talk more about that in a moment. We're going to have to take a short break right now. More on the African Union Summit when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.